Prior to that, he was a co-founder of ZapThink. He's got a, I think, 20-year plus career in research and opinion and writing, and been around long enough that he really knows what he's talking about. Not been around so long, he's not stuck in time. The great thing about Jason is not everybody likes everything that he says. And I hope that today you like everything that he says, but we'll see. Jason Bloomberg.
Thank you. Very good. Well, it's great to be here at CloudEXPO, or is it DevOpsSummit, or is it Internet of Services Expo, or is it Microservices Expo, or is it Internet of Things Expo, or is it Containers Expo? Right. So when the Syscon folks ask me to speak, it's like, well, here I am at the first keynote. How do I tie all these topics together? I don't just want to talk about cloud or just about containers or whatever. So I figured, well, innovation is the great consistent theme across all these topics. So that's what I'm talking about today. Innovation in the age of digital transformation. So Roger did a great introduction. At Intellex is an analyst firm. I talk about agile digital transformation. I write 5 articles a month for Forbes, several contributed blogs in my biweekly newsletter, and as well as my book. And I like giving away my book when I speak, but I only brought one, so you'll have to show up for my 4 o'clock talk on SOA and microservices, because I'll be giving away the book after that one. So all 2,000 of you should show up for that. Okay. So how do we drive innovation today, in today's digital world? And I love this slide because this is all made out of Legos, and this is the way the world is today, right? It's a lot of different pieces all put together, a lot of different themes, a lot of different stories, right? And that's part of that is reflected in the nature of this conference, right? With so many different themes and so many different threads that are all interrelated and all dealing with change, all dealing with disruption, and all essentially dealing with this innovation story at the vendors who bring tools to the market, as well as all of the enterprises who are looking to transform their organizations. So innovation now is a common theme joining the vendors and their customers. So when we talk about disruption in the marketplace, there's really a lot of different kinds of disruption. And the way I see disruption is a spectrum, right? At one end is the more evolutionary type, right? Where we have evolutionary innovation, where we have a product and we improve the product, we add new features, we add new capabilities. Right now it comes with, brightening agents, so you have better detergent, and that's great. And that is an everyday kind of innovation that any company that is looking to continue to make progress in their market is likely to do. How we go about this kind of evolutionary innovation is relatively well understood. It's a common process. So I'm not really talking about that kind of evolution. I'd like to work at the other end of the spectrum, disruptive innovation. This is when an organization is able to introduce something so disruptive it becomes a new market category. It's something that people didn't know they wanted until they saw it, and then everybody wanted it. So this is difficult, right? These kinds of innovations are rare. So I like putting up this slide, on the slide, the Walkman ad. Love that hair. Don't you wish we still had that kind of hair? And Sony's Walkman was this kind of innovation, right? When it first hit the scene, nobody knew they wanted one, and then everybody wanted one. So the first Walkman was a disruptive innovation. Well, Sony continued to innovate that, right? And one of their primary innovations after they released the Walkman was to move from a 1 cassette version to a 2 cassette version. That is an evolutionary innovation. So that's a common pattern, right? It's very difficult and unusual to have a disruptive innovation, and then evolutionary innovations follow after that, and they're much more common. So innovations can introduce disruptions, right? Whether it's the original Walkman or the iPhone, iPad, these are all disruptive innovations. Those disrupt markets and disrupt competition. But innovation also requires disruption. So the causal link goes both ways. Innovation causes disruption and also requires disruption. So what sort of disruption drives innovation? Well, there's external disruption, right? The external marketplace, the customer pressures, globalization, regulation changes, all these forces of change are forcing organizations to innovate, whether they like it or not, right? This is force of innovation. And then internal disruption, this is where you, as an organization, intentionally introduce disruption in order to drive innovation, as a way, essentially, of getting around the innovator's dilemma, right? Where you're don't have the courage to disrupt your own existing business in order to innovate, and then companies end up going out of business as a result. So, innovation requires the ability to innovate, or innovativeness. Innovativeness is an aspect of business agility. As I've been talking about business agility for years, and this is all part of the broader story of innovation. So how I define business agility as the ability to respond or change respond to change in the business environment, and also to leverage change for competitive advantage. So there's the more tactical part that breaks into responsiveness, being able to respond to changes, respond to customer demands, as well as resilience. And how do we deal with adverse events? How do we mitigate risk? How do we come back from failures and come back from problems? And then the strategic end of business agility is innovativeness. How do we actually leverage change to achieve a competitive advantage? Because that's really what innovation is for. It's not just coming up with new stuff for the sake of it. It's gaining a competitive advantage in your marketplace. And that's really what the business driver for innovation is. So when we place this into the context of digital transformation, well, disruption and innovation are driving digital transformation in enterprises today. So essentially, the challenge here is organizations, all of your organizations, whether you're small, mid-sized, large companies, or vendors or their customers, you need to capitalize on disruption within your organization and within the marketplace at large to achieve greater innovativeness as well as resilience in the face of your digital transformation priorities. So digital transformation, yet another buzzword. Lots of buzzwords we have to worry about, but I'm going to take some time to talk about what I really mean by that. So in the next few slides, you'll see what it is I'm talking about there. So Intellex, this is what we focus on, agile digital transformation. And I see that as the core business goal across enterprises around the world, across many different industries. This is one phrase that describes the transformative change impacting organizations today that is a result and also a cause of so much disruption in the marketplaces that we work in. So, agile digital transformation. Let's start with that word digital. Well, if somebody did ask me whether we should use that word digital, I would have said, no, that's a stupid word to use. Digital refers to computers that use ones and zeros, and we've been doing that since the 1940s. It's like this stuff has been around for decades. Why call it digital now? And so it's a bit misleading because we don't mean, oh, we're using ones and zeros. Of course we're using ones and zeros. That's nothing new. What it means is that customer demands, customer preferences and behavior are driving enterprise technology decisions. That's what I see as being the essence of digital today. So when we use that buzzword digital, that's really what we mean. So what customers are asking for, what they prefer, is exploding. Right? Customers are preferring mobile touch points and new kinds of tablets and different kinds of ways of interacting in retail environments and healthcare interactions with your physicians. And the list goes on and on and on. It's not about the touch points themselves. It's about customers and what customers are demanding and expecting from the companies that they work with. So the only reason really digital has anything to do with technology at all is because customers are demanding that. And that's really what we mean by digital. Okay. So what about transformation? Well, that word transformation, yes, there is a technology transformation story, but it's more about organizational change. In order for enterprises, especially large enterprises, to meet the needs of customers who are demanding this far richer set of technology-based interactions, we need to now transform the organizations to maintain focus on that customer. And that's an end-to-end reorganization that touches different parts of the company. So it's not just the customer-facing bit, the marketing, customer experience folks. It's them and everybody else, all the way back to development and operations, who now have to align with the needs of the customer. So when we talk about digital transformation, we mean that the customer pressures are driving both technological and organizational change across the entire enterprise. So you have to rethink how you're serving your customers. You have to rethink the role that IT plays in this new world. You don't want IT to slow things down. You need IT to support the needs of the organization as they move to this digital transformation model. You have to change how you build and manage teams, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. And you have to change how you innovate. What does it mean to innovate? How do you leverage change for a competitive advantage? How do you leverage disruption and introduce disruption in order to maintain a competitive position? This is changing within this context of the digital world, regardless of whether you're a technology company or not, right? Because every enterprise, whether you're a bank or an insurance company, manufacturer, retailer, you're all becoming software-driven organizations. That's changing the way you have to innovate. So where before you may have been able to innovate by, if you're a retailer, you may innovate by, building something new in your stores. Now you're innovating by introducing new technology and changing the technology that you put in front of customers. Okay, so what are we transforming when we say digital transformation? Well, we have to transform the customer experience. Why? Because customers are demanding that. Right? We're not doing something for customers that aren't asking for. We are responding to customer preferences and behavior. We're transforming the technology. It's an end-to-end story, and that's really why there are so many different topics at a conference like the one you're at this week. It's because we're transforming how these technology bits and pieces fit together to meet the needs of the enterprise's customers. Of course, we're transforming our internal organizations. DevOps is a part of this story. Digital transformation, broadly speaking, connecting the IT organization with the customer-facing part of the organization. That's a part of this story. It's an end-to-end disruption of the way enterprises are organized, managed, and how they deal with innovation. So the answer, of course, is all of the above. Digital transformation, it sounds like with that word digital, it's about technology. It's not. It's business transformation, and the same business transformation, same meaning that we've had for that phrase for, since the dawn of business. Well, now we're talking about the digital generation of business transformation. So, how do we do this? What is the key best practice that drives innovation in this broader digital context, given all of the disruption that we're facing and that we're looking to introduce intentionally? The key is self-organization. If we can organize ourselves, that's how we capitalize on disruption in order to take individual creative people and get them to innovate at the scale and level that we need in order to maintain competitive positioning in today's digitally transformed world. So self-organization, that's the key. And I'll be talking about what I mean by that and how it connects to various different themes that are part of this conference. So if you look at traditional organizational models for enterprises, any big company has a hierarchical organizational model. Well, hierarchical organizational models limit self-organization, right? Managers organize their direct reports into teams or other organizational structures, and that is not self-organization. That is a management-driven organization. So what do organizations do if they want to innovate? Well, they spin off separate teams that are outside of the traditional hierarchy. Right, skunkworks teams, sometimes, they're often in a different location. So this is a common thing to do, right? A lot of large organizations have done this because they recognize that it's very difficult to have disruptive innovation within the existing bureaucratic hierarchy, so they spin it off into a separate group, and that's essentially the pattern that I'm talking about. But we can learn better ways of doing that and better ways of leveraging that. Of course, if you have a startup, where that's the whole company, that is essentially its own skunkworks organization. So that big companies look at startups and say, we want to do that, so they try to create their own little mini startups. So the question now is, what about our digital efforts? Oop. There we are. A quick visit to Saturn, but we're back. Okay, so what about our digital efforts? Well, should they be self-organized? That's sort of the key question. We have this broad digital transformation, and how does that connect to self-organization? Well, some of you saw that phrase, self-organization. I'm sure the first thing you thought was the Agile Manifesto, right? So here it is, I'm quoting it, right? The principles behind the Agile Manifesto, the one we all like to look at when we talk about self-organization, says that the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams, right? So who knows what the hell they were talking about? Doesn't really matter what the people who came up with it meant by self-organization, but we've been talking about self-organizing teams ever since, and it's been a critical part of our mindset for how modern software development practices differ from the older approaches that we were looking to move away from 15 years ago when the Agile Manifesto first hit the scene. So self-organization has been something we've been at least talking about and trying to do at some level because it's part of Agile development. So it's part of Scrum and any other approach that leverages the principles of the Agile Manifesto. Okay, so now we have DevOps, which of course owes a lot of its sensibility to Agile approaches for creating software. And the challenge now is how do we take that self-organization notion from Agile, the self-organization that is now important to the DevOps, and scale it up to the organization. So this is part of the challenge. So I use the Zappos example because, Zappos has this new organizational model they call holacracy that is essentially a self-organization driven model. But it's also an experiment. We don't really know how it's going to work out. So that's that's an innovation. It's disruptive-driven innovation in terms of their organizational structure. Well, more and more organizations are trying different things. Maybe it's the same as Zappos, maybe it's something else. But there's many stories now of large organizations, both web-scale companies like Netflix or traditional enterprises like Walmart, who are trying different types of self-organizational models to drive their digital transformation efforts. Okay, so what does it mean to self-organize? Well, the individuals organize themselves, right? There's no external force telling them what to do in terms of how to organize themselves. The individuals collaborate depending upon business priorities. So business priorities come to the team from outside, right? It's the context of the strategic goals of your organization. But it's up to the team itself to say, well, this is how we should meet the priorities. So the team is responsible for their own membership, right? They decide who should be on the team, so they can call in new people or say, somebody's not fitting in, or somebody can move on, whatever needs to be done. Teams decide how they want to make decisions. So maybe, is it a democracy? Majority vote the best approach? Or are you going to appoint a leader? You're going to have a rotating leader? You're going to have a scrum master? It's up to the team to make up their mind which decision-making approach is best for what they're trying to accomplish. Now, we also want teams to collaborate with each other, and that should also be self-organized. So it's not just at the team level, but the goal is to build self-organization across the organization in order to support disruptive innovation. Now, am I saying that you should self-organize everything you do? Not necessarily, right? This is a special approach for dealing with situations that have a high level of disruption that is driving innovation. So it's a best practice for disruption-driven innovation. So, if you look at the big picture of what I'm talking about, well, this is essentially an adaptive behavior. Right, you can think of it as some of Darwin's principles of natural selection. Right, if your environment is changing, the species that adapt to the changes are the ones that are better able to survive. Right, so that's only important if you have an environment that's changing. So I use the dodo, and I found this great, one of the Tenniel dodo drawings from the Alice in Wonderland series. So it's the dodo with hands, and notice his right hand there has a sleeve. You see that? What's that sleeve attached to? That's the big mystery. Anyway, okay, there's the dodo. Well, the dodo was on a tiny island. I think it was Mauritius Island, and it hadn't evolved for many millennia because it had no predators. So it just laid its eggs on the ground because there were no predators. There was no problem. So there was no reason to evolve because there was no disruptive influence. Well, when the Europeans came, they brought their animals, they brought the pigs loved the eggs, the dodo went extinct because it was not able to adapt fast enough to the change. So, challenge we face as organizations is we're facing disruption. The more disruption we're facing, the more we have to adapt to change. And adaptivity is essentially a natural process of large systems. So how do we instill this in our organizations? So one of the secrets is how we deal with organizational connectivity. So organizational connectivity you can think of as how people communicate within an organization. So part of it is technology-based. You're thinking about email or telephones, and part of it is organizational question. How is the hierarchy designed? How are people supposed to report to their managers? How are people supposed to communicate horizontally across the organization? Is it ad hoc? Is it formal? What are the approaches you use for communicating? Tightly connected organizational networks limit flexibility. If you're loosely connected, right, there's flexibility with how you communicate. That facilitates flexibility. So that includes reporting structures, lines of communication, and what sort of expectations for collaboration an organization has. So this is why successful skunk works are more successful, and why less successful ones usually fail, is because of the organizational connectivity. So this is essentially a principle of networks that ties again to how you can come up with a large social system and how do you make it more adaptive. Well, how do you make it more adaptive? You loosen up the connectivity between the nodes on the network. So part of the story, and this is a common theme in my research, I have a whole section on it in my latest book, is treating business agility as an emergent property of the enterprise, where we treat the organization, which is essentially a social system made up of people, technology, etc., and we treat that as a complex adaptive system that has business agility as an emergent property. Emergent property is a property of a system as a whole that is not a property of any part of the system. So now this is an interesting point in the context of this discussion, because I showed that slide from the Agile Manifesto that talked about architectures emerging from self-organizing teams. I don't see that as this kind of emergence. Because if you look at a self-organizing team, the 2 pizza box team that is the favored size for an Agile team, it's too small to be a complex system. Right? You're not going to have any kind of emergence at that level. You have to step back from the whole system. So the same way you can look at bees and you'll never see the structure of the hive, you have to step back and look at the overall hive to see the structure of the hive, which is an set of emergent properties. Right? If you look at stars, you don't see the structure of the galaxy. You have to look at the galaxy as a whole. If you look at water molecules, you'll never know what it means to be wet. Right? Because you have to step away from the system in order to see these emergent properties. So business agility is something we want our organizations to exhibit. That's at the large scale. That includes innovativeness, and that's an important part of achieving business agility as an emergent property. So, and that ties back to the principles of adaptivity that are part of that natural selection. How do we actually use self-organization to drive the business agility at the enterprise level? So, self-organization is easier said than done, because you can't tell a team to self-organize, right? If you're a manager and you say, you folks, you go self-organize, well, you've already defeated the purpose. Why? Because telling them to do that is an act of organization, right? They'll look at each other and say, well, it's too late. We're already organized. You told us to self-organize, right? So managers can't self-organize teams unless, of course, they're on the team. And that's a model that works, right? If you have a startup, the executives are just part of the team, and that's part of how you drive innovation in a skunkworks group. So managers, it's not like managers have no role, but they need to be on the team if they want to help organize the team. So, what about digital strategies at the executive level? Well, you can't have some sort of strategy at the executive level that tells executives to do something that gets their teams to self-organize, because that ends up being self-defeating. So you self-organize by not organizing, because the people have to organize, not the managers. Right? So how do you manage change? By doing less management, not more management. And so that's very difficult for executives. It's a complete rethink of what it means to run an organization. And it's a pitfall for management consultants. So how many management consultants are in the room? Oh, not too many. I can make lots of fun of them. Okay. Well, the problem with management consultants is they talk to executives, right? They give executives all this strategic advice, and now, of course, every management consultant in the world is talking about digital, and they're going to these big companies and saying, well, you have to do this and you have to do that because you got to do digital transformation. But they're telling executives what they need to do, and what they need to do is do less of what executives do. And it's very difficult to start at the top and communicate this message. So, how many managers are in the room? Okay, we got a few managers. Okay, so word to the managers. If you want to foster self-organization-driven innovation because you're facing disruption, well, don't assign people to teams and don't assign tasks or projects to teams. Basically, you need to trust your people to do those things for themselves. Now, you don't want to determine success criteria for the teams. What does it mean for a team to get something right? You want the team to decide that. So what do you do? Well, you have to provide the context, right? What is the business goal? What are you trying to accomplish, right? And what are the constraints, right? What are the security, regulatory, other constraints that are just part of the boundary conditions that self-organization has to take place within? Right? It's up to the managers to communicate that. So here are the rules that you have to follow. Now just go and self-organize and figure out how to achieve these strategic goals. And then the most important task for managers is get out of the way. So if you're assigning people a task to your team, it's not a self-organized team. Okay, so this should be familiar from anybody who's been working in the DevOps environment, because DevOps depends upon self-organized teams. So how does a self-organized team in the DevOps context work? Well, they're focusing on continuous deployment and continuous deployment of software. What does that really mean? Does it mean every instant? No, it means really when the software is ready, but you're not building big monolithic applications. Your deployments are increasingly modular, and you're deploying various pieces when they're ready. So you have different deployments going on an ongoing basis. So for a large organization, you may have many different self-organized groups who are working on many different projects or many different initiatives or teams or whatever you call them, rolling out new software on an ongoing basis. And that's the continuous delivery vision for DevOps. That's a great way of leveraging self-organization to deal with disruptive innovation. You also have a fail-fast mentality, and this ties to the automated recovery best practice from cloud computing. Right? Cloud computing introduced this notion that it's not about preventing failure, it's about automated recovery from failure. So we want to fail fast, we want to recover quickly, and we want to do that in as automated a way as we can. Where if something goes bad, we automatically bootstrap a replacement or fail over to a different system or whatever it is, we want to do that in an automated, quick way. That is now part of how we deal with resilience as part of the DevOps organization, and that's how resilience supports disruptive innovation. We want to be able to fail fast. We want to be able to automate our recovery from failure. So if you're thinking, well, this would be great, I'd love to be on these self-organizing teams, what do you need to think about as a team member? Well, you need to take some responsibility for how to provide value to your organization. So you need to think about how you as an individual can provide the most value. Right? Self-organizing teams are made up of different people with different skill sets, different preferences, different abilities. So you have to know, well, okay, I'm really good at this, so if I'm going to help with solve this problem, I need to work with other people who complement my skills, and you have to have a sense as to how you fit into the picture. You need to leverage both formal and informal networks. So your formal network might be all the people, in the cube farm that you happen to be located in, but your informal network might be other people you happen to know in the organization, or maybe people you know on social media, or maybe you need to recruit new people that are necessary for this effort. All of these are part of what it means to be self-organizing. So you have to have a volunteer mindset, right? If you're just sitting there waiting for somebody to tell you what to do, you're not very good at self-organizing, right? You have to be up and ready to volunteer in order to solve problems that the organization presents to you. So what are the business challenges that your organization is facing, and how can you best help those? So if everybody in your organization is thinking that way, you'll have adaptive disruption-driven innovation across your organization. So the number one requirement, and I actually learned this when I learned more about how DevOps is supposed to work, number one requirement is empathy. So thinking about how other people feel. This is the number one requirement for making DevOps a success, and it's number one requirement for making any kind of self-organization driven innovation a success. You need to focus on other people right around you in your team, as well as across the organization, and think about what can you do to make them successful. How can you help solve their problems? If everybody is thinking that way, then self-organization becomes a well-facilitated engine of innovation. So you want to avoid the throw it over the wall pattern, right? I'm in dev. Once I check in the code, it's ops problem now, right? Throw it over the wall, or it's QA's problem, or whatever. Well, that is not empathic, right? You're not thinking about how ops feels or how QA feels, right? You're not even thinking of them as individuals. You're thinking of them as some other group, and you're just going to chuck stuff over to them. Well, that way of thinking has limited our ability to move to DevOps, limited our ability to adopt agile methodologies, and it's limiting our ability to drive digital innovation. Any kind of us versus them, right? We're competing with them. We're competing with some other group where, if our success is predicated on their failure, you don't want to think like that. Any kind of bigotry, obviously, has no place in this kind of organization. Any kind of thinking that because of the way somebody is, whether it's race, creed, color, national origin, gender, whatever it is, because of that, they don't get to work with me. Any kind of thinking like that will spell the death knell to self-organization. Okay, so how do you run all this stuff? Well, you have to essentially coordinate this in a self-organized way. So one of the ideas I proposed I call a Center of Digital Enablement. And if you read the article I wrote last year on this, I called it a Center of Digital Excellence. But I've since learned that centers of excellence are really more part of the problem than the solution. A center of excellence has become essentially an ivory tower roadblock for progress, where now you have to go to this center of excellence to get thumbs up on how to do something. Well, we don't want to take that approach. We want to take an enablement approach where essentially we're enabling people to get their jobs done. So we're facilitating, giving people the tools and expertise they need to do the self-organization they require. So this is why when I talk to enterprise architects, this is where the enterprise architect fits in. Enterprise architecture shouldn't be about IT portfolio management, shouldn't be focused on technology issues at all, but it rather should help facilitate how the organization goes about self-organizing. So how do you coordinate the best practice across the organization? Clearly, people have to learn how to do what I'm suggesting, and this group can help facilitate that. So essentially, it becomes an innovation competency center. How do we as an organization do a better job of innovating across the organization? And this group, the CODE, Center of Digital Enablement, should organize itself. Who belongs on this team? Well, the volunteers should decide to form the team. And they should figure out what they need to do and who their membership is. Right? Otherwise, you're defeating the purpose again. Okay. And I think I've already run out of batteries. Could you advance my slide one? It's not working. No, that's not it. I have a few more slides. One more slide. Very important. Okay, there we are. Excellent. So, the bar is set. And here's a quote that the internet says is from Steve Jobs, and we all believe everything we read on the internet, right? So, it could have been Abraham Lincoln for all I know. But I couldn't confirm it's actually him, but it sounds like something he would say, right? So what Steve Jobs supposedly said, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. Well, think about what that means in practice. If you're an executive and you want to hire people, what do you have in your head that they should be doing? And if you have an answer to that question in your head before you hire them, you're taking the wrong approach. Because if you want to be an innovative organization, like Steve Jobs' Apple was, and hopefully Apple still is, you want to hire people that will tell you, that will organize themselves and figure out for themselves how to solve the problems your organization's facing. So this is fundamentally a mission of self-organization, right? Because the executives don't know how to solve the problems. The people have to figure that out, people in the organization have to figure it out for themselves. And that's the power of self-organization driven innovation. Yeah, it's a goner. One more slide. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much. So there's my email address, copy of my book. Show up at 4 o'clock for my talk, and I'll give away a copy. My Twitter handle, and send an email address right now. I know you all have your phones, and you've been itching to play with them for the whole time. So send an email address to dodo@intellix.com. That is an autoresponder. You'll get one automated response and one only. It has a link to the deck on SlideShare. It has, you can sign up for my newsletter, a few other things, but it's just the one email, nothing to unsubscribe. So you can send an email address to that now, and you'll get an automated response. So, and that's digital transformation in practice. All right, so that's my talk. Thank you very much.